What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of 4 to 15 with Mel and Smooth. I am Mel, and joining me today is once again from College Football Focus, Mike Waxman. Mike, how are you today, sir?
I am fine, Mel. Hope you are doing well and staying warm.
I can deal without but the snow isn't bad, so I'll take the snow as long as it's not deathly cold like it is outside.
Right.
And the snow is kind of melting where we are, so I can't hit the little kids outside with snowballs.
Yeah, I know. If it's your own kids, it's okay, but when it's neighbor kids just randomly, if I'm out on my walk and I want to pick up a snowball and hit a kid, folks seem to frown on that. I don't know why.
Says who? Who says? I don't know who says this, but me personally, if you're outside, you're fair game.
Well, that's what I've said, but these kids are like 4 and 5. So,
Hey man, these little 4 and 5 year olds is dangerous nowadays.
I know.
I'm not putting nothing past nobody. So if you outside, if you got on a
That's
jacket,
right.
you are a walking target, and I do not care. Parents can get it too. I
There
will
you go.
start a snowball fight in a heartbeat. It will not bother me not one iota. We got a lot to cover. Not a lot to cover, but it's a lot to cover in a short period of time. As you saw with our opening, yes, I am all for this as we get to the final two, or as they say in the NCAA, the terrible two, as Ohio State joins Notre Dame in the national championship game. But first, we got to recap what happened last week as FCS and Division III national championships popped off, and one surprise, one no surprise. The no surprise being North Dakota State winning yet another FCS national championship, beating Montana State. Why aren't you surprised at this North Dakota State team?
Well, I mean, they're used to winning for one. I mean, they've got a long history of putting up titles. I think it was 9 and 11 years or something like that. They had been knocked off the mountain temporarily by South Dakota State. South Dakota State wasn't in this year's final. Um, Montana State made a really nice run for them. They had been kind of knocking on the door, but when you've got Cam Miller and you've got two All American offensive linemen and you've got Bryce Lance and you've got Eli Mostert on the defensive line and you've got some linebackers who probably could play in the FBS level. I just think North Dakota State is basically an FBS type of team that's on the FCS level. They churn out talent every year. They're going to have guys drafted, and I don't think Montana State has quite gotten to that level yet. So I think knowing how to win and having a bit of a talent advantage probably helped the Bison quite a bit.
I agree with that. I also agree with the fact that this is North Dakota State. And for those watching, if you're not familiar with North Dakota State, understand they are real. So real to the point it's almost gotten to the conversation with most circles is if North Dakota State should move up. I saw this on a video on YouTube 2 days ago, and that was the main question that they had was if North Dakota State should move up to FBS like James Madison. Here's the problem with that. Dakota State middle of nowhere. And I'm not saying that to hurt anybody who's a North Dakota State fan's feelings. It's not only that, your facilities are so subpar compared to the bottom of the barrel group of five that you have to go undefeated and make every bowl game possible for the next 10 years, even with the average MAC school. Now that's not to say that you couldn't.
Right.
That does kind of play into the question of should you not.
Right. Well, I mean, the Fargo Dome is a cool place, but you're right. As far as facilities go to be an FBS level, I don't think that it would necessarily work. And there are criteria that you have to hit before you can actually move up to FBS. And I don't know that North Dakota State has. And you know what? I think right now their athletic department, they're perfectly happy with where they are.
that's the thing because again, this question popped up with Mount Union, who we'll talk about in a second. But this question popped up about Mount Union 10 years ago. They were winning so much. I think they had won their 12th or 13th national championship. Everybody was like, "Well, why don't they just move up?" It's a lot that goes into moving up. You have to
Mhm.
essentially fit not only the NCAA standards, but the standards you would want to hold for yourself when you go out to figure out which conference you're going to play in after you sit and suffer in the independent level. Shout out to UMass, even though they're getting creamed right now in football. But this is the type of stuff you'd have to go through. And to be fair to North Dakota State, I'm pretty sure they've asked themselves, is it really worth all of that?
Yeah, and I just think right now financially it doesn't make a lot of sense. They're at the top of a level, and they're going to be, if not winning the national title every year, playing for it. And I just think that right now it's a perfect fit for the Missouri Valley. They've kind of ruled the roost. Them and South Dakota State, they actually put that region sort of on the map. If
Hmm.
they if they move up, then that loses a lot of the spotlight that comes for the Missouri Valley Conference and just for FCS in general because they've been so good. I mean, you can have people who follow only FBS football and they'll say, oh, yeah, North Dakota State. They're the ones who gave Colorado a run. They're the ones who a couple years ago gave Wisconsin a run. So I think that they know North Dakota State enough that they're kind of, I guess, if there's a brand at the FCS level, they're probably it.
And who could argue? Like, really, who could argue? Because they're essentially chasing Mount Union for most national championships, Mount Union and Notre Dame, excuse me, for most national championships all time. And
Mhm.
with that, you have to understand that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And
Correct.
right about now, North Dakota State in no way, shape, or form is broke to the point where they feel like they need to move up. For James Madison, it's different. They were giving North Dakota State a run for their money. They were seeing North Dakota State in the playoffs. They won a national championship back in 2016. This was something they felt was right for them, and they're actually holding their own. It may not be that way for North Dakota State. We don't know,
Well, and
but at the moment,
James Madison is in a pretty fertile recruiting area too, along the Atlantic coast and Virginia and all that. Whereas North Dakota State has to pull from North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Minnesota. They are not exactly hotbeds. And if you go to a major conference, I guess the best fit for them would probably be the new look Big 12. And you're going
ah,
against teams like Arizona. I'm saying if they went if they went G5, maybe Conference USA. Now they'd
I
be
was
the
thinking
kings of that
Conference
league.
USA.
They'd be
Actually,
the kings
I
of
was
that
actually,
league.
truth be told, since you brought that up, my
Maybe
thought
Mountain
was,
West. Maybe Mountain West.
which is now going to be absorbed into the Big 12 since we put the news banner up on our ticker. That was the other part of the news that we were going to get into. So yes, we'll jump right into that. Mountain West, starting, I believe it was 2026 per
Yeah.
ESPN and Bleacher Report, will be absorbed into the Pac-12 and will become essentially the new Pac-12, which was something I said to begin with when we saw all of this happening, to where the Big 12 or the Pac 12, excuse me, was going to be broken down, and we were getting Oregon, Oregon, Washington, and all of those other teams.
Yeah, I just think that I mean you're going to have Boise as I think a more natural fit, and it'll get to play Oregon State and Washington State, some bigger schools. Um, I don't believe it's the entire league. I think it's 6 or 8 teams, and I think you're going to still have a Mountain West because UNLV I think is still going to be in it, and I think that it may be getting a couple. I think Sacramento State may be moving up or maybe one of the UC Davis, somebody like that. There will still be a Mountain West. It's just going to be a lot smaller, and it's not going to have its flagship school, Boise State. San Diego State's moving, but San Jose State is not. So, but yes, there will be a new look Pac-12. it's probably going to be below the Big 12 in the pecking order for for power. They may even call it G6. It may not meet the parameters to be a power conference. So that's going to be
Well,
interesting to see how that does starting in 2026.
we'll never know. We won't know that until 2026. And who knows? San Jose State might change their mind. They're one of the few teams that was in the Mountain West that could actually give Boise State a run for their money from time to time.
Right.
San Diego State gets the corner of the market as far as getting a TV deal. Haven't really been on for real in the light that they should have been since Marshall Falk left.
Right.
But that was what, 1992, 93. You would see them on
Right.
ESPN a lot. So this is good for San Diego State. I think, just for the sake of discussion, if North Dakota State were to leave, I think this new look Pac-12 would be a good move, just because you're in my eyes, because a lot of people are going to disagree with this. In my eyes, you're up there with Boise State. So I don't see why you couldn't make this move if you go Power Five. But again, it's not broke, so you don't have to fix it. Just
Right.
the national championship. I don't think you're going to go anywhere anyway.
I would agree.
In other news, Northern Illinois has decided to leave the MAC, and I believe they are going to the Mountain West. If memory serves me right, if I saw that right.
Yes, that is correct.
And I gotta be honest with you, Mike. I am befuddled at this move. Of all places, I one
I I think the reason is, from what I understand, the Mountain West has, I mean, it's not great, but as G5s go, the Mountain West has a pretty good deal with CBS Sports Network. They have two or three games on every weekend. I believe their contract, while not radically bigger, is bigger than the MAC contract. But I think that's going to get offset by the travel budget that Northern Illinois is going to have, because they're going to have to
I
go to
was thinking the
Nevada
same thing.
and they're going to have to go to San Jose State. And so, how much are they really going to realize profit after all of that travel stuff is added up? Now, for right now, it's only for football. But I don't think the MAC is going to want them hanging around for
If they're not here for
basketball, for
football.
track, for some of the other things.
I agree. I agree. Call me crazy. And this is not a devil's advocate statement, but what I'm thinking is I think this is Northern Illinois' way of testing the water and seeing what they could get out of another conference, which isn't bad. But when you look at it, like you said, just with travel alone, and for those that don't know, or just a casual football fan, football travel is expensive, very expensive. The owners handle it in pro football. Meanwhile, the school handles it in college football. And even though college football is the giant moneymaker we all know it to be now, just take Hawaii, for example. Hawaii came a couple years back to play Ohio State. They got $750,000, but most of that was gone on the travel.
Yeah, because I mean
So
they're bringing the entire team, all the coaches, and the equipment. I know the equipment comes on trucks, but you still have to cover the cost of the travel. And the equipment has to fly across to get to the mainland anyway. Then
mhm,
you put it in the truck and drive from California to here. So Northern Illinois, they can bust to Central Michigan. They can bust to Ball State. They can bust to most of the locations in the MAC. They're not going to be able to bust hardly anywhere in the Mountain West. They're going to have to fly, 90, 95 players and a coaching staff of 15 and
not
whoever the equipment people are and the support staff. So you're
not to
probably
mention
looking
the
at about
band,
125 people on a plane traveling out to the West Coast and back.
not to mention the band, because the band's got to travel.
Right.
And and for those who don't know, Greyhounds don't float on water. You got to take that trip to Nevada. I know Hawaii is still going to join the Pac-12, the new look Pac-12, but for just for the sake of a discussion, if you get a home and home with Hawaii,
Yep.
one home game in Northern Illinois, the other home game is in Hawaii. Greyhounds don't float on water. They
Nope.
don't. So you would be paying close to $750,000 just to make that trip. Is it
Yep.
worth it? I don't know. I don't think it is. I get it. I get it. I definitely contract for CBS Sports is a little bit bigger. ESPN has been showing a lot more love within the last 10 years to the MAC, but I always thought, and this is just me, because I said this about a couple of schools, Cincinnati being one of them. I always thought, and me being the critical thinker that I am when it comes to football, if you're going to join a conference, you have to include logistics. You can't just add in the TV deal and say, I think we'll be
Right.
okay. It's not how that works. Logistically, you got to think about how we're going to get this team from point A to point B. In the case of Cincinnati and West Virginia, you're going to the Big 12. How do we get this team from Huntington, West Virginia, or Morgantown, excuse me, from Morgantown, West Virginia to Austin, Texas at the time? Austin,
Mhm.
Texas. How do we get them to Norman, Oklahoma at the time? How do we get them to Lubbock? How do we get them to uh what is that? Texas Christian. So Corpus
Yeah.
Christi. And Corpus Christi is on the other side of Texas. So you pretty
Or
much be
now
waiting.
get how are we getting them to Boulder?
There you go. So uh, even now, Arizona, Tempe, Tucson.
Hmm.
How are we getting these teams there? My thing was the smartest move for West Virginia and Cincinnati at that time when they made the move would have been, let's go to the Big Ten. Everybody's right here. We don't have to go nowhere. We save a lot of money. And that's you still keep your rivalry with Pitt. You can go up north a little past Pitt and go to Beaver and play Penn State. Ohio State, we've seen Ohio State in a few, traditionally, we've seen them once every 5 years. That's not a bad thing. And with Cincinnati, literally, if you were going to bring in teams that you not only need or would want for TV purposes, but for sports purposes as well, Cincinnati's got one of the best basketball programs in the country. Why would you not?
Right. Well, I think the problem with those two, the Big Ten seems to be sticklers about schools being part of the AAU, the I want to say Amateur Athletic Union, but that's not right. But it's an academic federation of schools. If you don't have AAU accreditation, then the Big Ten basically won't look at you. That's why Nebraska, even though it seemed like an odd fit, it was an AAU school. When people were talking about a couple years ago with the ACC maybe breaking up, they were trying to say, okay, who'd be the good fit for the Big Ten? North Carolina, North Carolina State. I don't know how many schools in the ACC have the AAU accreditation. So before anyone looks at bringing new schools into the Big Ten, that's what they have to check out is whether they have the accreditation of the AAU because the Big Ten wants to hold up this academic banner and wants their schools to be kind of on a like-minded mission in terms of academics. So I don't think, while I think geographically West Virginia and Cincinnati would be great fits, I don't think that they have a lot of what the league is looking for.
To be fair, to back you up on that, the AAU in basketball actually stands for Amateur Athletic Union.
Yeah.
So realistically, I do think Cincinnati falls under that umbrella, considering they have some good basketball teams down there as well. Not only just at the high school, but at the college level too. I with this Northern Illinois move, I'm gonna go. I'm standing on what I said. I'm befuddled because this made no sense outside of a challenge,
Right.
and
Well, and
I
you know what? In 5 years, because who's coming back to the MAC this year? UMass. And
I
they
for
were in the MAC before, and then they left.
that was so
And
long ago though.
I know, but I'm saying I think Northern Illinois may see in 5 or 6 years, because realignment's not done, they
Yeah,
may, like you said, it's an experiment, and they'll say, you know what, fiscally, this didn't work for us.
and I agree with that. And I, truth be told, I literally forgot. Dude, I forgot.
It was a long time ago.
Uh,
I mean, Temple was part of the MAC at one point.
yeah, that was one of those things. Like I was a kid. I was still a kid when UMass was in the MAC. When
Hmm.
uh Marshall was in the MAC. Yes, people,
Yep.
Marshall was a MAC school right around the time Randy Moss and Chad Pennington were leaving, but they were there. So it thank you for bringing up the other part of that news was as UMass is tired of getting beat on as an independent, they're also joining the MAC or rejoining the
Yep.
MAC. But you might be right on this. You might be right because this to me this is an experiment. You couldn't get anything else out of this except the chat because what are you gaining from this outside of the CBS deal?
Right.
Uh moving on, Division 3 while we're at it. Oh, shout out to KZ Productions on Facebook. Catch the show on there live as well right now on our Facebook and our YouTube channels. We are also sharing the link on uh, Twitter and Instagram. Oh man, this one hurt my heart. In the Division 3 National Championship, Mount Union fell and fell hard to North Central, score 41-25. It was a close game. I promise you, I went, got something to drink. It was 25-28. We were down 3. Next thing I know, it's 37-28.
Hmm.
What the hell happened? And then before I know it, North Central's hoisting up the national championship trophy again in Division 3. What did you see that happened in this game that just was like, okay, North Central's for real?
I just think that their offense, I mean, is really it's got guys who can run. They definitely want to throw, but they also have guys who can run. Whereas Mount Union wants to kind of run by nature, and sometimes if they get behind, I don't want to say they panic because they're too veteran and the coaching staff is too good for that. But I think it's harder to do some things when you're so run centric. And I just think North Central kind of came in with a lot without a lot of fear. I think they expected to be there, and I think Mount Union expects to be there given their history. But I think Mount Union, for a rare change, knew it was an underdog and would need to do something to kind of turn the tables. And North Central just played its game and just gained momentum as the game went on.
They did. And even with Echeverry, running his heart out, uh, it seemed like at times offense was really playing behind the sticks. And when you play behind the sticks, and for those who don't know what that means, it's a football term meaning second and long, third and long. It's hard. It's hard to play behind the sticks because you're trying to catch up, especially if you're down a score, down 2 scores. And for most of that game, up until it was 25-28, Mount Union was down 2 scores, one
Right.
score. And every time Mount Union would score, North Central would either get a score or, get close enough to where they could, but Mount Union would get the stop but couldn't capitalize. If My question to you is if you're Mount Union, what are you doing for next year's recruiting to make the team better?
I don't know. I'll be the first to admit, I don't know the status of a lot of their skill position guys, if they're juniors, if they're seniors. The broadcast was long enough ago that I've kind of forgotten that info. If they have some younger guys on campus or if they need to go recruit some guys, I would get some guys at least on the outside at receiver who can be difference makers because that just seems to be the way the game is going. It's
Hmm.
certainly that way at the FBS level. It's becoming that way as we're seeing with North Central um, at the lower levels, D2. has that. And I just think that it's great to be physical, and I think that works on defense. I mean, Mount Union's been one of the best defensive teams in the nation for years, but I think if you can't put pressure on a team with your offense and your kind of your success is based on getting 4 and 5 yards on the ground on first down, that sometimes is kind of a dicey thing. If you have a quarterback and you can throw, you got a lot more flexibility, a lot more options. And if you do get into second and third and long, you can maybe pick that up a little more often than if you were in, say, just a run attack. That's why I'm so amazed at what Army can do. Army's going to run the ball even if it's 3rd and 7, and they'll pick it up. But they're just so used to running, and their line is so working in concert that they can pick up those third and longs. But them and Navy are the exceptions. Not a lot of schools are going to pick up third and long or fourth and long just by running the ball. So I think Mount Union can get a couple of difference makers at receiver. I think that will at least get them going. I don't think they need to do much defensively. Like I said, I just think North Central was kind of like a snowball rolling downhill, and they got stronger as the game went on. But Mount Union played some pretty decent defense and had some nice hits and did a decent job slowing down North Central's running game too. They just kind of got overwhelmed with the passing attack.
Well, I'm going to take a leap out on faith on this one. Realistically, even at the Division III level, Mount Union has an advantage over Navy and Army, and in some cases, Air Force. Army, Navy, and Air Force aren't recruiting athletes; they're recruiting
Right.
guys who want to serve in the military.
Right. They get
You might
appointments.
get
Yes.
you might get one or two athletes, but even then, that's not the entire team. So when you
Right.
see Army, Navy, Air Force get a 3rd and long or 4th and long, it's because they're essentially lunatics and they're determined to complete that drive.
Mm-hmm.
What we saw with Mount Union was, well, what I saw was this was again, they were just in a shootout with Johns Hopkins the week before. So I don't think they were overwhelmed. I just think being the battles caught up to them.
Yeah.
Like you like North Central put games away early,
Yep.
all playoff. Their entire side of the bracket, they ended those games early. Those games were over by halftime. With Mount Union, you made quick work of John Carroll, sent them off to the NCAC with a big screw you. And then after that, you were in games. Like every
Mm-hmm.
game was within 14 points. I think that caught up to him because you can't play that many games and literally come into the championship game with the best team offensively in all of D3 college football and just be okay with playing from behind, chasing plays,
Right.
chasing the scoreboard. Like that, I think all of that really caught up with them.
Yeah, I think there's some validity to that. I mean, rosters aren't as deep at the D3 level too, so playing multiple close games, even though there was some time between the semifinal and the final, it's a little more difficult to recover if your roster isn't as deep or as talented as maybe some other teams would be. So there's probably some credence to that. I mean, if you're going in the fourth quarter, hey, we got to make a stop here to win the game, or we got to score here to put this away, you're still mentally and physically giving your all. Whereas North Central, like you said, 66-0, 41-10. They might have the starters out there, but they're just flexing. They're not really playing that hard.
Right. And they don't even care because they know the game's over at that point.
Right.
Once you hit 40 and it's before halftime, like what are you really panicking about at that point? And
Right.
those path to the entire D3 playoffs. So congratulations to North Central. You broke my hearts yet again, but it's okay. I noticed you got your FIU hat on this time.
Yep. It kind of matches what I'm wearing. So
I know,
nothing
I
real
know.
special for that.
And it's gold and blue. And speaking
Yeah.
of gold and blue, I'm gonna put this up one more again
There
because
you go.
here we are. The loss to Michigan, uh, it did tick me off because I'm one. Because I'll put this one up too. The bracket is set. The terrible two. Here we are. The national championship next week. Notre Dame versus Ohio State. But as I was saying, the Michigan loss ticked me off because realistically, if you're if you're me or if you're you and you pay attention to these teams up close, when you beat your rival, that gives you a lot of momentum. So I'll go back to 2022 or 2002, where Ohio State beats Michigan 13-9. They're riding momentum into the national championship game against the Hurricanes. And I think, honestly, them beating that Michigan team gave them confidence to beat the Hurricanes. Fast
Yeah,
forward,
it probably did. But they won all their games that way though, kind of dramatic fashion. So
they
I
did.
don't think they were
That
worried
year
about
they
being in
did.
close games. Ohio State this year had two close games. Oregon, which they lost. I guess Penn State was close. It was a touchdown game. They won that. Nebraska was a slog, and they won that by 4 points. But everything else was pretty much kind of like North Central, putting teams away pretty early and putting your feet up on the bench.
To be fair to Nebraska, they were trying so hard because they have never all time. I think they're like 0-10, 0-11 against Ohio State all time. So, and this has all been since Nebraska had joined the Big Ten because they had never played outside of that. So, to be fair to Nebraska, they were giving a damn good effort. But fast forward for Ohio State in 2014, you knocked off a Nick Saban Alabama, and that pretty much steamrolled you into the playoffs national championship, and you destroy Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, what were your thoughts on this Texas game? We're going to review both games, both semifinal games. But what were your thoughts against Ohio State against Texas, and what were you thinking about as that game went on?
Well, Texas did a lot of what I thought. They have some dudes up front. That Colin Simmons, he's going to be a problem for college football for the next 2 seasons on the edge because he's really good. And then they've got Alfred Collins inside. They had Anthony Hill. They had the talent and the makeup to cause OSU some problems. And I think with as well as OSU rolled over Tennessee and rolled over Oregon, I think it was good that they were able to face some adversity. They got stopped on some drives. They had to punt. Some of it was self-inflicted, 9 penalties, which
Yeah, man.
you can't do that against good teams and expect to always come out ahead. And I will admit, for a brief second, when Texas went down and tied it at 14, I'm thinking, you know what? I've seen this movie before, and I know how this goes. And then Ohio State put together that really nice drive where they started out passing, and then the last few plays were runs. And Will Howard, the turf monster, got him and
Man,
probably should have scored. But you know what? In hindsight, that ran another 2 or 3 minutes off the clock.
it
So in
did, but
hindsight, that is actually a good play. And then
it
they get
went.
down there. Judkins, Howard doesn't get in on the sneak, but Judkins gets in. And when it was 21-14, I said it's a lot easier to do what you're doing on defense when you have a lead. When Texas got right to the goal line, not sure what they were thinking, trying to call a play wide. You're not going to run wide on this team. And Caleb Downs made one of the best plays I've ever seen from a safety. He literally knew where the play was going before it got snapped, saw where the hole was, directed even though he didn't make the tackle, he directed the runner wider than he wanted to go. And then Cody Simon and the other guys were there to stop him for a 7-yard loss. And once that happened, even though it was only second down, I said, they're not going to score him. Now, did I think Jack Sawyer was going to go scoop and score? And as he said, almost black out during the run? No. But that's going to go down in lore because it gave them a cushion, and it was so unlikely the guy who was kind of the hero. Although, you know what? He had been tipping passes this entire postseason, he's been great at getting up and knocking balls down. So he's been a really vital member of the defense, and both he and JTT played an outstanding game against Texas. And
And
I
here's
think
my
that those guys and the defense were really kind of had it on their shoulders this time to get them through, whereas the offense had been so good the first two games.
and here's my thing with that. You had called it. And what I mean by that is I remember our last show's conversation, and you were saying they're gonna take away uh Jeremiah Smith. And they did. And who showed up? Ibuka showed up. Judkins showed up. Henderson
Carnell
showed
Tate
up.
showed up.
Carnell Tate, Will Howard. You
Mm-hmm.
had 6 other people that took over that game. And look at it. Ohio State did not trail in that game against Texas.
Correct.
So because you took away one aspect of their offense, 6 other aspects of the offense came together and said, all right, we got to make this work. Yes, Texas's front line is going to cause problems in the SEC and college football for the next 2, maybe 3 years if they stick together. But Sarkisian and the offensive coordinator have to make better decisions in the goal line. Because, like you said, why are you running wide against Ohio State when everybody else who's actually had success, minimal success, but success against Ohio State has kept it between the tackles? You run a big sweep or a toss play, and you're right. Downs diagnosed this play from the word go, and he turns it into a 7-yard loss.
Mm-hmm.
And then no communication the next couple plays, especially on the Sawyer play. No communication on the offensive line as you see Sawyer creeping up on the line.
Yep.
Yes, did he get chipped? He got chipped. What blitzer hasn't got chipped? But it didn't stop him from getting to his former roommate, Quentin Ewers.
Yep.
And I'm going to say this with conviction, if Ohio State wins the national championship against Notre Dame, that's the play that we're going to remember that got them to where they are. I'm not saying Ohio State's going to win because they got a buck, they got an inside source in Marcus Freeman, you know, at the
Right.
head coaching helm. But when we look back at this, postseason, after season, conversation, when we look at the totality of what happened in the 12-team playoff, that's the play that's going to stand out the most. Why? People are going to ask, why does that play stand out the most? Because if you're a Texas, that's going to be the what if that bugs you all off season. People can
Yeah.
argue, people can disagree. Realistically, as a player, it's plays like that when you're down on the 1-inch line because of 2 pass interference penalties. They can't give you a touchdown off the second
Right.
pass interference penalty, but they can move the ball half the distance to the goal. Half the distance to the goal in that sense is the 1-inch line.
Right.
And you do nothing but go backwards. That's going to be a what if that bothers Quentin Ewers, bothers Sarkisian, bothers the entire Texas offense the entire offseason.
I know, I agree. And I had a couple of friends text me and said, "You're still over 2 minutes left. Why not kick the field goal to cut it to four? And then next time a touchdown can win the game."
You would
And
think
I
that.
said, "That's interesting, except that Texas had been breaking in a new kicker." Now, that was basically an extra point. So it wouldn't have been a super Herculean effort or anything like that to do that. And being on the other side of 2 minutes, you would still have the 2 minute timeout, and you had two timeouts left. So if you kick the field goal there, you kick it deep. Maybe Ohio State gets the ball like at the 20, 25-yard line. If you stop them a couple of times, call timeouts, they're pinned to you, and maybe you get the ball like at your own 35. You've got a
With a
shot to
minute and some
score late to maybe
change.
win the game.
And there is a thing that bugged me as a defensive coach and a defensive player. They ran the exact same play twice and got 2 touchdowns off of it. So
Yeah,
what would make me think, to be real, What would make me think they wouldn't try that play again and get the same result?
Right.
Because
Well, yeah,
how,
that wheel route, OSU's linebacker was always the one the one you could see Sonny Styles crept up, and I'm thinking, okay, where's the guy drifting back into the flat to get the guy? No one drifted back, and there's Jaden Blue up touchdown, easy.
yeah,
Um, and so you're right. It's kind of like when Oregon came to Ohio State and CJ Verdell scored 3 touchdowns on the exact same wide zone play that Ohio State never covered. And he scored 3 times on the exact same play. And I said the same thing. It's like you're at the shadow of the goal line. I understand it's condensed, but run the wheel route again. OSU hasn't covered
hmm
it all night. So
and on top of
sometimes
that,
coaches outsmart themselves.
and Sarkeesian's outsmarted himself on that. And
Yep.
to be honest, again, a lot of teams that the one team or two teams that did beat Ohio State, they had success running up the middle.
Yep.
Now, did Jim Knowles correct that problem? Yes, which is why
He did.
Texas probably felt they needed to go outside. I don't think that's strategically a good move to make, but that's probably what Sarkeesian was thinking. That's probably what the offensive coordinator was thinking. But at the same time, you can't put yourself in that position and not come out empty handed. You
No,
can't come
I
out
agree.
empty handed.
And Texas is a team that all year has lived on explosive plays. They led the country in gains of 20 yards or more. They had 102. They only had one play over 20 yards in the entire game. And so I think you got to tip your hat to Jim Knowles. I think I read something that might have been on ESPN or maybe The Athletic. They said that on that drive, that last drive before Sawyer hit before they had the touchdown, a staffer called up to Knowles and said, well, they scored on that one. And Knowles looked at him and says, they ain't scored yet. And then they had Sawyer hit him and go scoop and score. So I think Knowles was a little bit crotchety because one of his assistants interns had said, hey, they scored. It's like, they ain't scored. I still got something for them.
And that's the
So,
beauty of Jim Knowles' defense. Like for those
yeah.
that like get granted, I was not a fan of the Jim Knowles pickup signing just because I had watched the product at Oklahoma State. Now, granted, I was wrong because my thinking was, dude, you're coming from the Big 12. It's pass happy. This is Big 10 football. We got to grind it out in the winter. What makes me think this is going to work? And here's why it works. Jim Knowles finally has the athletes he needed when he had this defense at Oklahoma State. And what I
Yeah.
mean
Well,
by that, he has the safety, he has the linebackers, he has the
right.
line that he needed. And don't get me wrong, that Oklahoma State team that he had on defense was great. The problem was they were chasing everybody. With
Right.
this
It was
defense,
risk reward. The
yeah.
defense is a lot of risk reward. They get tackles for loss and sacks, but if they don't get there, they give up big plays. So
And
it's how much of a risk are you willing to take, knowing there's going to be a couple of busts every game.
and with this
And
Ohio State team,
In the Big 12, that can work because Oklahoma State with Gundy and some of those guys when they had um, Spencer Sanders playing quarterback, they could win these 38-35 games. Ohio State doesn't want to do things that way. So he decided late in the year after the Oregon game, when they weren't getting a lot of pressure, to bring more blitz, play Jordan Hancock instead of up on the slot guy. He's basically made him the third safety playing the deep half, which lets him move Caleb Downs around. And we see how good Caleb Downs is when he can freelance and just put him anywhere.
and he's arguably one of the smartest players in college football
Oh, yeah.
because when you have a player like that, that is scary. That is
Yep.
so
Another
scary.
coach on the field.
And the reason it's scary is like you said, one, it's another coach on the field. Two, that means this man has studied enough film, studied enough of the playbook to know if and knows gives him the freedom to make the adjustments, make the audibles, make the calls that need to be made. That's scary. How do
Yeah.
you and I'm not saying you can't play against that, but if you're Quinn Ewers and you've been struggling all year against defenses that have been able to adjust on the fly, how do you prepare for that? You can't.
Yeah, it's tough.
On the other side of that bracket, as we saw, Notre Dame beats Penn State and advances. Unfortunately, James Franklin, once again, you lose the big one. I I tried to call this. I knew it was going to play out the way it did once Notre Dame got that interception, but I saw this playing out differently, and then Marcus Freeman just was like, "Yeah, no, it's not happening." He didn't lose to Penn State as a player. He didn't. He's not going to lose to him as a coach. What
No,
were your
well, and the
thoughts?
thing is, people talk about James Franklin always makes one or two egregious gaffes. There really wasn't a whole lot in this other than his management of timeouts at the near the end. I think that they probably could have done a better job with that. But there's usually a play call where you scratch your head and going, okay, what the heck are they doing? And the offense, credit to them, they got down and they got back into the game. And Notre Dame was having trouble stopping Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. Those guys got theirs. But I believe I read somewhere it was the first game either in the postseason, certainly in the postseason, and maybe in the last 20 years that did not have a completion for either team to a wide receiver. Every completion was either to a running back or a tight end. And that to me is amazing. I know
That
that
is
Penn State
amazing.
doesn't have anyone who scares anybody other than Tyler Warren. And Notre Dame is the same way. I mean, they've got a couple of guys who are decent, but they're kind of hampered by Riley Leonard's ceiling. He can throw to Mitchell Evans going across the middle or down by the sideline, but Riley Leonard is much more of a dual threat guy that teams have to think about tucking and running, and he's 6'5", 230. And if you get too far back, he's going to pick up a first down. Well, you're not really worried about his arm. So Drew Aller is a better passer, but even he was off because Notre Dame, Al Golden blitzes so heavily that Aller
Hmm.
got thrown off his spot and had to throw the ball early and had to throw it away. And I don't think he was able to set up the way that he needs to. And so their passing game didn't work. But to Penn State's credit, they got back in the game. There was a time in the third quarter I'm saying this is over. And Notre Dame needed a late field goal to win the game.
Uh, I'm gonna take a step um Rico's playbook because Rico had mentioned in one of his Rulers Minute videos that he didn't think Drew Aller was a uh, top 10 pick. Did you see that
I
in against Notre Dame?
I can kind of see the potential is there. I think his arm talent is pretty good. The problem is, and this is the same problem with Quinn Ewers. I think Quinn Ewers, arm wise, can make all the throws, but Quinn Ewers' footwork isn't great. He's not great on the rollout. I think Aller has gotten better on the rollout, but I think Aller is not consistent with his footwork. And as you know, you can get away with that sometimes in college. You're not going to get away with bad footwork in the NFL.
That
You
is
can have
true.
the best arm in
That
the
is true.
world, and if your feet aren't doing what they're supposed to do, you're going to have about a 3 or 4 year career, and they're going to bid you goodbye. So, I mean, he made he made a throw. I think it was the third quarter to Tyler Warren on the sideline. He had to layer it over two Notre Dame defenders, and I said, okay, that's an NFL throw. And then the last throw of the game that Notre Dame gets the interception, he said he was just trying to throw it into the dirt. Well, you got to be more aware and not just kind of release it, actually throw it down. You can't make a mistake like that and have top 10 potential and make mistakes like that. So yeah, there's 2 or 3 throws every game where he teases you, said, okay, that can work in the NFL. And then he'll have 2 or 3 throws where you're going, you know what? He still has a long way to go. So I can see kind of what the NFL likes, but I think it would behoove him to come back now. This ain't a great quarterback class. So I guess maybe you can strike while the iron's hot and we'll see what he does. Personally, I think it will help Penn State a lot, and I think it will help him a lot to come back because I think they can be a real contender again next year if he's playing.
I do too. And I think for the sake of Penn State, he should come back. That's not to say he will, but you're right. If he's going to be a NFL type of quarterback, be he's got to be aware of himself.
Mm-hmm.
And that Notre Dame game showed he's still got a long way to go. And that's not his fault. It's not entirely his fault, but it is a lot of this does play into him knowing, look, I got to get rid of this ball, but I can't just make the dumb decision to just throw it in the dirt. If I'm going to get rid of it, I got to get rid of it.
Right.
On top of that, we saw it in the Ohio State game. He's not good against the blitz. And even
Yeah,
in the
and some quarterbacks thrive in that. He's not one of them, at least not right now.
and even in the Big Ten championship, he's not good against the blitz. You gotta be calm. You gotta be collected. You have to have some poise in the pocket. And when he had defenders in his face, that's not the case. So I'm leaning on agreeing with Rico on him not being a top 10. Not to say he won't get drafted, but top 10, kind of far-fetched at the moment.
Yeah, but you know how the NFL kind of overpays and overdrafts quarterbacks. I mean, I don't think any of the guys this year. I mean, Shadur and Cam Ward would probably be the two guys right now who would be at the top of the ladder. For me personally, I wouldn't take either one before pick 20, but both of them are probably going to be top 10 picks because it's so vital to have a quarterback these days that you kind of overdraft them.
True. True. Ah, man. All right. We come to the final. We come to the part where we make our picks. Before we go into this, I have to throw out these stats. Marcus Freeman, as a head coach at Notre Dame, is, I believe, 0-2 or 0-3 against Ohio State. That's not to say he can't beat Ohio State. But you have to take that into consideration because as much as we dislike Ryan Day's approach to coaching at Ohio State, he has been successful. He does suck against Michigan right about now, but he has been successful against top 10 opponents.
Well, and his record against top five now has gone from 2-6 to 6-6. If you can be
Which is
500 against top five, you're doing pretty well because it's hard to beat top five teams.
it is. And not only is that the point where I was going to make because he is 6-6, he did that in one season.
Yeah.
Now that in itself is a hell of a feat as a coach because not a lot of coaches get that luxury to beat so many top 5, top 10 teams in one season. You may get 2 if you're lucky, 3 if you end up making it to the conference championship. But right now, he literally improved his record from 2-6 to 500 in
Yep.
one season.
Yep.
If you're if you are Ryan Day, what is your approach to this game?
I think it will look a bit more like the first two games did. I think that Texas's defense was able to take Ryan Day and Chip Kelly a little bit out of their comfort zone. A lot of the motion and pre-snap movement that had been so prevalent in the first two games. After the first quarter, there wasn't a lot of that. And I think that played into Texas's hands. Notre Dame is another team with a stout defense that I think you're going to have to get them maybe drifting the other way. If you can send Jeremiah Smith across the formation, or you can motion G. Scott to the other side and run opposite because the linebacker goes over, I think you're going to need to get your pre snap motion back on this. OSU has the advantage in terms of athletes and speed. Notre Dame might be a little more physical on defense, but and their secondary is real good, even though they're missing their best corner, Benjamin Morrison.
Hmm.
Their corners are good, but their corners are freshmen. And they, unlike Texas, who was going to play zone most of the night, they play man. They blitz, Al Golden blitzes, and they play man. I don't know if I like my chances playing man against number 4.
I don't either. I agree.
And that's the one area that, okay, maybe because Xavier Watts, who won the Thorpe Award last year, Xavier Watts is a ball hungry safety who I think has 12 or 13 interceptions in the last 2 seasons, which for a safety is insane. Um, he is good in coverage and can help with the slot guy. So maybe Egbuka doesn't have quite as big a game as he normally would. But I just think there's going to need to be some help. And as we saw, though, you concentrate on Smith, you can go to Egbuka, you can go to Carnell Tate, you can go to Trey Henderson out of the backfield, you can go to Judkins, you can go to the tight ends. It's it's just such a double-edged sword because if you commit to take the running game away, it's got all these weapons out wide. And if you say we're going to commit to stop the pass, and Notre Dame is number 1 or 2 in a lot of the passing categories defensively, then you and that was the thing with Penn State. Penn State with that inside tackle run, they were getting 9-10 yards on some runs with Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. Well, OSU's got their same kind of two-headed monster running the ball. And so I guess you got to pick your poison. The one thing Notre Dame's really good at, they lead the country in takeaways. I think they've got 31 or 32. And as we saw with the blitz, Will Howard threw that ill-advised interception, and he was pressured on that play. So you know that if Notre Dame can get home, they're going to look to take the ball away. I think that is the one way they can level the playing field. If they can force him into a couple of mistakes and get a short field, because I don't think Notre Dame's driving long field to score against this Ohio State defense. But
They're
if they
not.
get it at the 35 or if they get it at the 40, at the very least, they can get in field goal range and get on the board.
I I wanna I wanna agree with you. Mo, I see you out there, man. I see you. I see you. I want to agree with you, especially because we have not seen Notre Dame really battle tested because outside of the NIU game, USC's not really been a challenge this year. They haven't been the USC that we're used to seeing. The Reggie Bush, the Matt Leinart, the Lindale White of old. They are not the they're not the national championship contender you were used to seeing out of USC. Not to mention, essentially, people can say that people can say what they want about this, but this is a true statement. Essentially, Notre Dame is an ACC team, considering how they have the con to play at least 6 games
Right.
with ACC opponents when 90% of their rivalry history is in the Midwest. I will never understand that. But for Notre Dame's defense, like you said, they're freshman DBs with one exception, which is their safety. Here's my problem with this. If you're Notre Dame, what do you do when you literally take away Smith, Tate, Ibuka, but you can't take away Judkins and Henderson, who can both who have, and this is the advantage that they have over a lot of teams offensively. Both Henderson and Judkins can catch out of the backfield.
We saw that with the 75-yard screen right before halftime.
Exactly. That's
That
my
was
point.
drawn up about as well. It's a low risk play. It's designed just to get you some yards and maybe see, are we going to play hurry up? And the 3 linemen lined up so perfectly that Trey knew exactly where to run, go right off the left shoulder of the outside blocker. Once he was about 6 inches in front of the Texas guy, he was gone. No one was catching him. And what was supposed to be a play to jumpstart the offense to determine, okay, are we going to be aggressive? Boom. All of a sudden, you score before half and you're getting the ball to come out of halftime. That really gave Ohio State a boost. And that's what Notre Dame has to be afraid of. they're thinking we've got the receivers locked down. We're in good shape. Here comes
And
Trey
boom,
out of the backfield on a wheel route or a screen pass. Boom.
touchdown. And that's the explosive ability that having not one, but two running backs that can catch out of the backfield.
Mm-hmm.
That's like having two Marshall Faulks. And for
Yep.
those that don't remember, with the greatest show on turf, the 99 through I think 2003 Rams, Marshall Faulk was a big part of that team's success because they have a running back in Marshall Faulk that can catch out of the backfield.
Not to mention they had Torrey Holt and Isaac Bruce that teams had to worry about.
The two fastest
And so
guys on
Marshall could
turf.
do his thing. Marshall won me two fantasy football titles because I made sure to draft him because we got credit for receptions.
Mo, what did I tell you, man? What have we always talked about? You can't just say a team is done just because you feel like they stink. Notre Dame made it this far, and you of all people should know how hard it is to win any kind of championship. So I'm going to be unbiased about this. It is going to be very hard for Notre Dame to win the national championship, something they have not done since 1988. So with that, I'm throwing out this stat right here. November 2nd, 1935, Ohio State 13, Notre Dame 18. October 31st, Halloween of 1936, Notre Dame 7, Ohio State 2.
3-run homer won the game 7-2.
They have not beat Ohio State since 1936.
6 in a row.
I'm saying this to say the tradition between Notre Dame and and Ohio State is so thick. This People don't consider this a rivalry, but it is a rivalry. The reason it is a rivalry is because one, both of these teams played in what was considered back then games of the century.
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody, and this is at a time where Notre Dame was coming into its own. Yes, you had to worry about Michigan, but obviously Notre Dame was not worried about Michigan. With that, one of the few teams outside of those Reggie Bush USC teams that could handle Notre Dame has been Ohio State, and it's been consistent. Again, Notre Dame has not beat Ohio State, and I am knocking on wood because you see me decked out in Ohio State gear all the way. I'm
Yep.
knocking
Well,
on
and
wood
two of
because
two of them were in bowl games too.
they were.
Yeah.
The rest have been home and home.
Yep.
So I'm saying this to say if you think this game is not going to be tough and down to the wire, you're sadly mistaken. The only way I think this really gets out of hand is if literally they Notre Dame's defense puts a close eye on Ibuka and Smith, and Henderson and Judkins go off early. That's the only way I can see this blowing out of the water. If not, you have an Ohio State alumni who knows how the tradition of Ohio State works. He gets it. And this is why it was between don't get me wrong, I'm saying this because I'm sticking with it. Do I care for Ryan Day as a head coach? Not really. And the reason I don't is because when it comes to Big Ten football, he doesn't completely get it. It gives me John Cooper vibes because you can't be this good of a coach and you can't beat one team. And that one team, when you have beaten them, has put you in a bigger pedestal and bigger contention for the national championship. When you lose to this team in the past, now there's a 12-team playoff. But when you've lost to this team in the past, it's knocked you out of national championship contention. So the keys to this game for me is if Ohio State can stay balanced, if they can keep Notre Dame honest, they'll walk away with this one. Defensively, it's even. To me, it's even. The only thing I see differently is Al Golden is going to blitz the shit out of Ohio State.
Oh
And
yeah, he is.
Will Howard is going to have to literally read where everybody is in that front seven and make sure they know where they are.
Well, and Notre Dame does that little subtle shift or stunt right before the snap. So they line up. You think you know where they're going to line up, and about a half second before you snap it, they all move in unison sideways so that where you thought there might be a hole, now that hole is not going to be there, and you're going to have to go a different route. I agree with you. I think that Notre Dame is going to battle because that's what they do.
Hmm.
For me, it comes down to one simple thing. If Notre Dame can't run, and Jeremiah Love is a home run threat, Darian Price is more of the physical type guy. If they can't run, they can't win because, like Penn State, Notre Dame has no receivers that scare anybody.
That's
You
true.
or I might be able to
That's
play
true.
corner against them and shut their receivers down,
I
even
was
though
a
I'm only
corner.
5'6".
I,
So,
we're not too much taller than each other. I was there at
so,
safety, so
so I think that if those guys are breaking off 5, 6 yard runs and keeping Notre Dame ahead of the chains, and Riley Leonard is maybe doing his RPO and getting 5, 6 yards per game, then yeah, it's going to be a close game. But if they can't run, I can't see them scoring a lot on offense. So that's going to leave it to kick return, which they've had one of those in the postseason, or getting the turnovers and having a short field and not having to traverse 80, 75 yards to score. Because I don't think Notre Dame can grind it out and score against Ohio State. And they're
to
not
be
really a big play offense.
they are not. And to be fair, Ohio State has not allowed a special teams touchdown, I believe, this year.
They have not, and they've actually had a couple. They've now the other thing, Notre Dame has blocked 6 kicks. So maybe the punting game needs to be a little bit more on watch because they've had a pretty easy time with the punts. But Notre Dame has been crafty. They've blocked, I think, 2 field goal extra points and like 4 punts. That's another way that you can kind of tip the scales is to give your team great field position because of a block punt. And who knows if it bounces right into your hands, it's a touchdown.
That is true. Outside of that, I don't believe. Yes, Notre Dame leads the country in takeaways, but Will Howard this postseason has been very good and very careful with the ball. So
He has.
Al Golden is gonna have to come up with something, some kind of rabbit he's gonna have to pull out of his hat to get Will Howard to make a mistake. Also, keep in mind, if I'm not mistaken, Al Golden was a head coach at Notre Dame. He has not had success against Ohio State. So these things I think will play into the mind game that Ryan Day has an advantage in. And no, and like Jim Knowles' defense, I think, truthfully, I think this game we're going to see a different defense altogether from Ohio State that probably puts Notre Dame out of its misery. And I'm only saying that because the past 3 games, we have seen a different style of defense depending on what Ohio State is facing.
Right. Well, and I think that you might see, especially on the outside, I think you're going to see a little more press coverage, a little more playing closer to the receivers. Because with Texas, you had Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond, who, if you were too close to them, could get behind you. So they played a lot more zone and a lot more of a shell coverage to keep the Texas receivers in front of them.
And they
Again,
did.
Notre Dame has the tight end and not much else. So I don't think that these guys are worried about the receivers running past them and going over the top. And even if they do, how consistent is Riley Leonard's arm throwing deep?
He
I
is
don't
not
know.
very
I
consistent.
so I think that you may see, especially because Notre Dame, it would also, if they're closer to the line with the receivers, when it is a running play, they can leave their guy and help tackle and stay on the outside so that if Leonard somehow breaks contain, they're right there on the edge to get him to a minimal gain.
Not that it would help because JTT and Downs are pretty much, and Sawyer are pretty
Right.
much hounds when it comes to the sweeps and the breakaways and outside leverage. I I want Marcus Freeman history. It would be he's already the first black head coach to coach in the national championship game, but it's too many factors against him. I'm not saying he can't do it. My heart wants him to do it and make history, but realistically, there are a lot more factors in favor of the Buckeyes than it is for the Irish.
Yeah, I would agree. And this might be one time, and I know that this would get out of Ryan Day's normal comfort zone. If they win the toss, I take the ball. He always defers. I would take the ball, see if, especially, and if for no other reason to test Notre Dame's defense. If you don't score, you don't score, but you have confidence in your D. But if you score right away, 7-0, now Notre Dame goes, man, we got to play from behind now. And that's not normally what we do. You're
It's
putting the
not.
pressure on them early.
It's not. Keep in mind, Ohio State's last national championship was the first college football playoff. It was 14 playoff. Oh, Ohio State
And
beat.
that's the funny thing is
It's
10
full
years
circle
apart, first year of a 4 team. This is the first year of a 12
of a
team,
12 team.
10 years apart.
Full
You
circle.
had you had 85 yards through the heart of the South. You had Jack Sawyer 83 yards through the heart of Texas.
Oh
So many
man.
similarities with this.
Oh,
It's almost
not
scary.
it is. It's very scary once you think about it. Not only that, again, uh, Ohio State has their last national championship 10 years. Notre Dame has not won since 1988.
Yep.
That's got to play. That's a lot of pressure for the Irish. And every time they've
It
gotten
does.
close,
And when they've been in championship games, remember Alabama boat raced them?
man,
They they have not done well in semifinals, certainly in finals of when it was the BCS. Alabama just went in and just immediately shut that
dismantled.
down before it got going.
Man, how do you, if you're Notre Dame, how do you even? Because I know these questions. If you're a Notre Dame fan, you know these questions are hitting. You know they are.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I've seen enough football to guard against saying Notre Dame can't win. Any team can win any game because you can say logically, here's what I expect to happen, and this is what the talent would dictate, this is what the scheme would dictate. But we've seen enough games go sideways that were supposed to go to a certain form, and they don't. So I'm not going to say Notre Dame can't win, but it will take a big confluence of things going in their favor for them to win the game.
I agree. All right. So since we're on the same page, final predictions, scores.
I'm seeing something like 31-21 Ohio State. I think that 10 points sounds like it's close, but I think OSU will actually be up like about 31-14, and Notre Dame will score late to make it look closer than it is. I just, again, I think Ohio State, they do really well early. They've scored on their first drive in I think every game. Um, and if they do that this time, whereas Oregon had a pretty dynamic offense, Tennessee had a pretty dynamic offense. If Notre Dame gets down early, and I know that 7 doesn't sound like a lot, but with that kind of offense, they can't afford to get down by much more than 10 early. I'll tell you that much. Or it could be Katie bar the door.
September 30th, 1995. Ohio State 45, Notre Dame 26. September 18th, 1996. Ohio State 29, Notre Dame 16.
I was at both of those.
January January 2nd, 2006. Ohio State 34, Notre Dame 20. I believe that was a Fiesta Bowl.
Yep.
January 1st, 2016. Ohio State 44, Notre Dame 28.
That's when Jalen Smith hurt his knee.
Yes, it was. I remember that play. And then September 3rd, 2022. Ohio State 21, Notre Dame 10. Have you noticed the pattern outside of September 23rd, 2023, when Ohio State won 17-14?
They're fairly comfortable wins.
I am confident in if Ohio State gets up by 10, the gas pedal is going to hit the floor.
Oh, yeah, it will.
I'll say I'll restructure that statement. If the score falls in favor of Ohio State, by either 10 or 14 points, Ohio State is going to hit the gas pedal and they're not letting up. I
Yep.
think Ryan Day wants to make a statement as a head coach if he gets up by 14 points. Excuse me.
Yeah.
The
Well,
reason I
and
think
I think he realizes if they fooled around a little bit against Texas and it was a little bit too close for comfort. So they were up by 7 and they had chances and they had stupid penalties. They had uncharacteristic drops, which you haven't
Mhm,
seen from these guys. And I think that even though they won, I like games like this because the coaches have enough to drill into them. Hey, guys, we can't be dropping the ball. We can't be having false starts. We can't be having holds. If they played a perfect game like what they played against Tennessee, then I'd be worried because what are you going to tell them? They're just going to
yeah,
believe that we can just go out there and beat everybody. When you make this many mistakes and penalties and you're a little bit sloppy and you drop the
it's
ball,
a teaching moment.
coaches love games like that. You won comfortably, but you can drill this into them.
It's a teaching moment. But I
Yep.
brought those 4 games I brought those 4 games up to say this. If you're Notre Dame, you do not want this game to get out of hand because 2 out of those 4, actually from 95 all the way up to 2006, those were some of Notre Dame's best teams
Yep.
within the last 30 years. Keep that in mind. Mark Edwards, NFL Super Bowl champion, was on one of the 95 and the 96 team. He lost them both.
Mm-hmm.
Brady Quinn, Browns draft pick and former Browns quarterback, was on the 2006 team. AJ Hawk married his sister.
Yep.
He lost the game. I I'm not seeing this pattern change. So I'm going to go 41-28. I'm going to
Yeah.
give Notre Dame the I'm going to give Notre Dame a chance to tie it at halftime, and then Ohio State keeps runs away with this one in the second half. So 41-28, Buckeyes, they cap off the national championship. Ryan Day saves his butt for another year, and we see what happens next year. But for right now, Ryan Day, he's got the keys. Do not fuck this car up. Excuse my French.
Well, and then he no longer has a title of best coach to not win a national title. I guess maybe that goes to Sark. Maybe. I mean, because Texas
Maybe
has been in the picture the last 2 years and looks like they're right on the brink. And next year they're going to be real excited with Arch Manning taking over. So they may actually
you're
start the
right.
year preseason number one.
You are absolutely right. They just might. I forgot Arch takes over next year because Ewers is a senior, and Ewers is even with this the game he played at Ohio's against Ohio State, he might be a top 5, top 10 pick.
So we shall see. But one point I wanted to make: how different would John Cooper's legacy have been if there was a 12-team playoff? Because I think a lot of what Ryan Day has done this year mirrors what Cooper did. He couldn't beat Michigan, but when they played some, and I understand in bowl games against the SEC, he wasn't good, but they generally, against the other teams in the Big Ten, after that big beatdown early on in his career when Penn State won 63-14, he was good against Penn State. He was good against Michigan State when Michigan State was good. Um, he
Mind
was
you, that was
good
a
against,
Saban coach, Michigan State.
yes, it was. And so I wonder if because he had this type of athletes, if getting into a second round, like, okay, we get a second chance to do things now, I wonder how well they would have done in a format like this, where maybe if he even if he doesn't win it, but they advance to a championship game or two, or along the way they knock off an Oklahoma or they knock off a Georgia or somebody, maybe Cooper's viewed a little bit differently
I do
because
you
he
one
had the
better.
athletes to have good
He did.
teams.
He had the best. He had some of the greatest Ohio State teams to
Yep.
ever come out of Ohio State, and that's what frustrates me. Shout out to Coach Pearson. Shout out to Coach Stanley Jackson. Shout out to Coach Eddie George. But I'll do you one better. How different would John Cooper's career be if he took it as serious as Tressel? Not
That
just the
too.
Michigan game.
No,
If he
right.
took his career at Ohio State just as serious as Tressel did. How different would his career be?
Yeah, Tressel is so detail oriented though that I think even while I think Urban is a tougher, like preaches toughness, I think Tressel is so much more, and Urban is legendary for his attention to detail. I think Tressel was more detail oriented than Urban was. And I had never seen anything like it. And I still marvel to this day how when he's meeting with the media, he has that senatorial sort of thing. Lights go off, he can kind of bullshit with you and he'll cuss and he'll tell you funny stories. But when the lights are on, it's just he doesn't give you
All
he says a
business.
lot of words without saying anything, is what we always used to say covering Tressel. He spoke a lot of words, said very little of substance. And he liked it like that because he was controlling what the message was.
And you couldn't figure it out until game day. That's the beauty
Yep,
of it. So, with that being said, once again, January 20th, 8 p.m. on ESPN, the national championship, Ohio State versus Notre Dame, and what might just be another game of the century. But Mike, tell the folks at home one more time where they can find you rather.
they can find me on social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter at CFFM Waxman. And I will be having a lot of Notre Dame Ohio State content in the coming week. Comparison, contrasting, a couple of opinion things. So all the way up until the day of the title game, there's going to be content about the championship. So we will see how that goes. Then after that, I'm putting my feet up for a few days because the season's over. And frankly, it's been a long season and I want to put my feet up. So
I'm with you, man. I'm gonna take a couple of days off myself. So after next week, will we see Ohio State or Notre Dame hosting up the national championship trophy? It remains to be seen. Find out on the next episode of Dragon Ball Z. I love saying that. Finally get to say it on air. But that concludes this episode of Fourth and 15. We appreciate Mike and all of his knowledge for helping us out today. We got it.
thank you. Always good to be on.
And I am with you on this. I gotta say go Buckeyes because I got all my Buckeye stuff on and I'm not wavering from it. But I do think this will be a tough game and we'll see. So for Mike, I am Mel. We will see you guys.
It's happened, baby.